Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's just an honor and a pleasure to talk to everybody today about our shared passion in the Saiga Conservation Alliance of Saigas. So I'm going to just share my screen now, and hopefully that will work. Can everybody see? Yes. Okay, so this is called a Saiga Saga Resurrection. And I'm speaking as both Professor at Oxford University and the chair of the Saiga Conservation Alliance. So I'm going to give you a talk that kind of intertwines three separate themes. So as Louise said, one of the themes is the sad fate of the Aral Sea and its transformation from the fourth largest inland water body to the state that we see it in now. Another theme is about the kind of passion and commitment of a group of conservationists, several of whom are on this call, to make a difference for conservation in Uzbekistan and particularly in Pakistan. And then the third strand is the wonderful Saiga. So for those of you who haven't had the pleasure to meet the Saiga yet, it is the keystone species of the Central Asian and Russian steppe. It's the only really abundant grazing wild ungulate in that area. And you can see it's a beautiful creature. It's one that is very well adapted to the very cold winters that you get and also to the dry summers. You can see the males have horns and the females don't. So the kinds of conditions it has to put up with are, you know, very continental, very dry climate, and you can see it's perfectly adapted towards that. So Saiga's found in only 5 populations in the world. There are 3 that are involved in Kazakhstan. So the Aral in West Kazakhstan, the Ustyurt, which is the one which is transboundary with Uzbekistan. So that's the one we'll be focusing on today. Then the large one in central Kazakhstan called Betpakdala. It also has a population in the pre-Caspian region of Russia and a completely different subspecies and a small population in Mongolia as well. So we'll be talking mostly about this Ustyurt population. And just to give you a flavour of the Ustyurt ecoregion where it lives and survives, here's a nice summer picture of desert and here's a winter picture. So the Saiga has been associated with humans for millennia. And here's an example of the kinds of associations that have happened. So these are pictures of a aran or hunting arrow, which it was used, you know, 1,000 years ago and right up through the Middle Ages to hunt saigas. And if you look at the bigger picture, the tall picture, you can see that it's kind of an arrow shaped, but in the top in the middle, there's a hole, and they drove the large herds of migrating saigas into that arrow, and then they killed them. And if you can see the picture on the other side, I don't know if you can see it through everybody else, you can see the car on the right-hand side of the other picture. You can see the size of these things, and they're scattered right across the northern part of the Ustyurt Plateau, that very widely used. So here's some more examples. Oh, I don't know why there's let's just get rid of the red if I can. I don't know why there's red on it. I think it's somebody's cursor perhaps. Okay, so you can see here, these are some other ways in which the Saiga is culturally important. So the kind of yellow skull is something that was taken by our colleagues in Karakoram, Pakistan. So it's an amulet, a kind of cultural icon, which is a Saiga. And the left-hand one was taken in a market in Hong Kong. And it's showing kind of horns beautifully presented for sale as traditional Chinese medicine, which has been a real problem for the Saigas, as you'll see. So Saigas were very abundant as a species in the steppe, and you can see some really lovely quotes here from the 19th century of Russian explorers who went down to Central Asia and wrote about what they saw, and they saw huge numbers of sagas covering the whole steppe. There was also large amounts of trade by the Russian Empire. So you can see Maya saying that there were 66,000 pairs of horns passing through the Kyrgyz-Chinese border. And this was for Chinese traditional medicine. But then at the time of the Soviet Union, there was, the saiga was already pretty much depleted, and it was already in very few populations in small areas because it had been so hunted in the 19th century. So that actually for the saiga, the coming of the Soviet Union was a relief, because the border with China was closed and there was strict control on arms and so on. And so the species was relatively well protected. So much so that, by the 1950s, 1960s, the population had grown very large again. And so, all the way through to the 1980s, there were millions of those animals on the steppes. However, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, 3 interlinked issues arose, which caused problems. The first one was that the border with China reopened, and that meant that there was again a market for saiga horn. And these pictures here were taken, that picture was taken in Hong Kong just after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Secondly, there was massive rural poverty as all the subsidies for agriculture were taken away. And so the picture at the top is of a village that was a prosperous village when I first visited it in 1990. And this picture was taken in 93 when the village was basically abandoned. And then the third thing that happened was the loss of funding from management of wildlife and law enforcement that meant that saigas could no longer be effectively protected. And so there was rampant poaching in that period. And what that led to was this kind of thing. So this is all the Kazakhstan populations. You can see in the 1980s, they were kind of bouncing about a million animals. And then we have a big gap of a few years when there was no money for management, there was no money for surveys. And so we didn't know how many saigas there were. When the surveys restarted, the population had halved over that period. And then for the next 5 years, the population halved every year. So overall, it was a 95% decline in saiga populations over just a 10-year period. Shocking decline, the fastest decline ever recorded for a mammal species. So by 2002, we were looking at potential extinction. But then governments, NGOs stepped into action, and there was quite a concerted effort by range state governments and NGOs to change things. So here's our colleague, Alexander Esipov, and he's training the managers of a new protected area in northern Uzbekistan, the Saigachi Reserve. He's training them in camera trapping. So, there started to be protected areas put in across the range. There was also a lot of public engagement, so that the Saiga Conservation Alliance were going and talking to school children. They were talking to people living in the villages about the importance of cultural heritage of saigas and about the importance of not poaching them. The SCA, Eleanor, who's on this call, also instituted a crafts collective for women so that they could guard their Karakalpak craft, and then also they could sell these for some of their livelihoods. And all of this effort that happened across the... could we just ask for a mute there? All of the efforts that happened across the board meant that in some populations, since 2002, the population really started to expand very, very quickly. So the Bekpak Dala population in central Kazakhstan, you can see it shooting up to about 250,000 animals. In Aral, which is in western Kazakhstan, you can see the population also increasing. However, you can see that in Ustyurt, which is the population that's shared with Uzbekistan, you can see it didn't increase. So all that effort hasn't really led to any changes for the better for saiga populations. So you see actually in the Bekpak Dala population, this massive decline in 2015, like a huge drop. And that is because that there was a disease that killed 200,000 animals. So about 80% of the population died in just 2 weeks in one spring in 2015. Well, that's the topic of another story. So I won't be telling you about this because we're focused on Uzbekistan today. So what is it that led to the Uzbek population not recovering? And there were a number of things that happened. So here's a picture that explains some of it. Here's the Uzbek population. You can see it's transboundary between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. That orange line at the bottom is the border. Those wiggly blue lines are individual sagas that have been tracked by a GPS collar that allows you to see where they're going. And you can see they're wandering about all over the place. So the first thing to note is the border, and that only a few of them are going into Uzbekistan at this time. And that is because there's a fence that was erected in 2012, which was part of the Kazakhstan, Belarus and Russia customs union that meant that the Saigas could no longer pass into Uzbekistan to their winter migrations. The second thing is you can see a railway that's being put through the breeding areas that's going to be disrupting them. And the third thing that might have caused this issue is further poaching and also climate change that means that Saigas are going further north now. So here's a picture of the border fence in which you can see it's really hard for an animal to pass through. And that has now been a bit remediated by the Kazakhstan government. As I said, poaching has also been an issue, and that's on both sides of the border in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Okay, so that's a little bit of my history of Saigas. Now I'm going to move on to talk a bit about that wonderful place of Pakistan. So we all know that the Aral Sea has been a centre of dynamism and culture for millennia again, and that it's somewhere that is, you know, really special, but has also been dynamic over the years. So that, you know, where the Aral Sea Delta was and where the Sir Darya went at the time of Alexander the Great is not where it is now. But at least, you know, in the end of the 18th century, in the kind of early end of the 19th century and early 20th century, the Aral Sea Delta was a flourishing place with, you know, a lot of water, a lot of productivity, and a lot of fish. And these are pictures, by the way, that were taken that are on display in the Savitsky Gallery in Nukus, which is a beautiful bit of culture. And I'm sure you're all aware of the major Soviet port that Munak town was, right on the southern part of the Aral Sea. It was also a major fishery supplying the whole of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. And of course, it was also an area of major cotton production, which was, of course, the downfall of the sea as irrigation stepped in and caused pesticide pollution and the loss and diversion of water, which led to what we know of as the destruction of the Aral Sea, the loss of much of the sea area, the poisoning of much of the Uzbek plateau by pesticides and salts, and the consequent problems both for the health of humans living nearby, for their livelihoods, and for conservation. So this is a Google image of the Aral Sea area now that I just captured, and just to kind of show you where we are. This is Munak that I was talking about, which was the big port where the sea fishing port and the Soviet port. This is the border with Kazakhstan, and it's also the place where the Saigachi Reserve is that I mentioned before, which was specially created in order to conserve that population of Saigas. And this is the next topic of my conversation, of my talk, which is Resurrection Island. So you can see here that it's no longer really an island. It's a peninsula now, and it's shared with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan.
I have to keep me out of the wind as much as possible.
Is it possible just to mute yourself, Leslie Jane? Leslie Jane, could you mute yourself? Thank you. So that's Resurrection Island. Resurrection Island was a closed military base for many years during the Soviet times. It had a settlement and some laboratories where it was testing biological weapons. So it was a place where people were not able to go. Here's some interesting pictures from the time of Resurrection Island. Now it's abandoned. So in about 2012, it became both abandoned and open for people to be able to access. So not officially closed anymore. And you have these amazing buildings. There's some wonderful blogs where you can see photos of these wonderful old buildings that are now deserted. So in 2012, Yelena, who's on this call, and her colleagues at the Institute of Zoology of the Academy of Sciences of Uzbekistan led an expedition to have a look at the ecology of Resurrection Island. And what they found was extraordinary and amazing, and something that gives hope in the dismal history of the Aral Sea. So what they found was this is a place with a very beautiful, unique, and pretty much pristine flora and fauna. It's actually an island that has been cut off by the sea for 400 years or so. And so what you see is that there are, it's a unique place where there's still really good populations of raptors. There's still, when they went, there was still a wolf population. There were also saigers, and perhaps those saigers have been on that island for those 400 years. So it seemed to be a place that was beautiful and definitely worth protecting. The reason why the saigers were able to survive, and almost even after it was opened up and people started to come to loot, to poach, was that the saigers are protected by the fact that the Aral seabed is still very muddy and very salty. Here's some Saga footprints you can see on the seabed. So it's really hard for poachers to follow them onto the seabed, which means that they have some kind of protection and they're still able to hang on in there. And you can see that they're still able to hang on in there, because this is a camera trap image that was taken last year in January of a really nice herd of saigers in this region. And so really there is still hope for saigers, even though they have been poached, even though the Aral Sea region has had all its share of destruction, there's still nature there, and that includes the saiga. So the last bit of what I'm going to talk about before I kind of tie all of them together is a road trip that I took with colleagues from the SCA, so Lena, again, who's on the call, and also some donors from the USA, from the Wildlife Conservation Network, you can see there. We took a trip and we went to see what the situation was in this region. Here's us in our hotel in Nukuz before we started out. And this trip was just wonderfully eye-opening, and about all the possibilities that there are for turning this story of difficulty and lack of hope into something that is more hopeful. So we saw the wonderful archaeological ruins. We saw, layers and layers of history all the way back from, the 8th century onwards. We also saw the fact that the Sirodaria River peters out now into sand, almost 200 kilometers away from Munak. And this is Munak village, in which, what was once a proud seaport is now much reduced, but still there. We also saw the power of education and the inspiration and enthusiasm of the children and their teachers for the environment and for saigers. So this is a saiga flash dance in Nukuz. Here's some of the volunteers that work for Saiga Conservation in this region, celebrating Saiga Day. And then we also saw that other kinds of ways in which the economy is starting to impinge on Karakalpakstan. So this is the Uzkor gas plant in Kirkuz, which is actually a place where the Saiga Conservation Alliance have been working for a while, and where the oil plant the gas compressor plant has been supporting environmental education. They supported Saiga Day when we were there, and are very keen to work with the local community to change both social and environmental situations. But at the same time, as Joe's going to tell you in his next talk, there's a lot of industry coming along in this plateau. The other thing about Munak is that it's definitely a place where there's a huge tourism potential, whether it's the ships on the Aral Sea bottom, which is the iconic image, or other cultural sites, the archaeology, and even the environment. The other thing that we saw was that the Aral Sea bottom is no longer dead. This is the product of a substantial reforestation effort. You can see there's vegetation here. It's never going to be the same ecosystem that it was. There's no point thinking backwards. But if you start instead to think forwards and you think about what it could be, then you start to see that actually nature can return. And the Saiga can lead the way in terms of helping nature to return. There's also children who are incredibly positive about their future, the children who really want to make a difference and want to see their economy and their livelihood sustainable. And here's a lovely picture that some of the children drew There were some wonderful pictures, even though they've never seen a Saiga. They drew these great pictures, and it was rather touching that all the pictures had some water in them, even though Saigas don't actually like bathing so much. So what is the future for this region? What was the thing that we kind of felt would work? And what we felt was that, you know, there's real potential to tie in both the protection of this wonderful resurrection island that has been given this second chance, with the Saiga as a kind of iconic flagship, with the building of sustainable tourism, sustainable livelihoods based around Resurrection Island, and with engagement with industry to make that much more sustainable and biodiversity aware. So that children no longer want to poach, children want to be, want to see Saiga as part of their heritage. And so that people can make a decent living from homestays and from crafts. And so that the gas companies can actually fulfill their interest in environmental and social responsibility. So that is the future that we see for Saigas. That is why we call it Resurrection, a Saiga story. And here's the area that we're talking about. And the idea is to support the government to make the Resurrection Island into a protected area that is adjacent to the Saigachi Reserve we already have. And then the green area is the area of a project that might restore livelihoods and give people pride in the region. So that's our vision. I hope we can genuinely see resurrection in the next few years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Milner-Gulland. It's very good to end on a positive note as the, and the idea that industry can help contribute to conservation. I guess that will be a theme that's going to be developed in the next paper by Dr. Bull. Do people have questions to Dr. Milner-Gulland, having followed her presentation? Please feel free to speak, unmute yourself if you have questions. Peter, I can see you have a question.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Louis and Rosa, first of all, thank you for another brilliant British-Uzbek Society event. You seem to cover such a diverse range of topics, and it's so educational and so informative and really enjoyable. So thank you to that. And thank you to the professor for an excellent presentation. My question's a very quick one. What is the government in Uzbekistan's attitude to this particular ecological crisis, disaster, situation, whatever we call it? Is the government being quite open and transparent in terms of trying to attract international support to help, perhaps from the donor community or other communities? Or is the government perhaps rather like previous regimes or administrations in Uzbekistan, trying to kind of hush up things that are not always such comfortable reading for them? So just the question really was, is the government sort of up for acknowledging this and opening up and being transparent and trying to get support and help? And the final thing is just on the same theme, while I've got everybody's attention, is British Expertise, for whom I'm consulting, is always looking to do more events, and we'll be having some other Uzbekistan-related events coming up in the future. But the question was about the ecological situation, the government's attitude. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. So actually, the Saiga has been this most amazing story of cross-sectoral international collaboration. So there's something called the Convention on Migratory Species, which is a UN convention, and the Saiga is like the poster child for how to get governments, NGOs, academics all working together to save a species. And the Uzbek government, Goscom Ecology, has been really, really good at getting involved with the Saiga MOU under the Convention on Migratory Species, and have been very open to the Saiga Conservation Alliance and to academic involvement in trying to help to improve the situation. I think the issue is that, you know, there is still poaching. Khalkha is a poor area in which, you know, there's few livelihoods. And so it has been challenging to get the investment that's required. And it's, I guess, there's been a lot of investment put into Kazakhstan, from the international community, from international NGOs. Kazakhstan has had a lot of international support, and it really shows in those graphs that I showed you. But it's been harder to get international support into Uzbekistan. And I wonder if Elena would like to just comment a little bit, because she's right at the cutting edge.
Thank you.
Does Elena want to say something about that?
I just would like to confirm your voice. Actually, it's government now. It's very open and very happy to invite international campaign and foundation for investment for the wildlife conservation generally. And government feel very strong about Karakalpakstan itself and about Aral Sea region. Because everybody recognizes this zone of ecological crisis and economical crisis still up now. And of course, this government very keen to make focus for development this particular region in terms of economical development, social development, and wildlife conservation development as well. And our idea is unite all ideas and help country to make balance between human needs and nature needs. And I hope it will be possible to do this, support different agencies, not only wildlife conservation agencies. And we think that it's necessary to follow a complex approach to involve such ministries like Ministry of Tourism, for instance, and development companies like Uskorgas, for instance. And of course, first of all, it's local community, local people, and wildlife conservation agencies like Ecology. And we, like representative of Academy of Science and Saiga Conservation Alliance, very happy to help and support as much as possible and make our best. And of course, educational component is very important also. It's some NGOs, our partners, and Ministry of Education could be involved with this project. I think it would be a very nice approach to involve all interested parties to make very good job, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So Nikki put a question in the chat, which I can answer, which is just, do we think that the aspect of botany and ecology would be potentially good for ecotourism? And yes, absolutely we do. So now that Resurrection Island is open and safe, there's definitely potential for botanical tours to look at this really interesting kind of ecotone of vegetation that's been kind of protected for 400 years and not grazed, which is quite unusual in this region. And actually, you know, having been there, and I'm sure all of you people who've been to this region would attest that it's culturally, ecologically fascinating, really varied. So I hope you come, Nikki, when it's possible.
Could I add? It's also landscape tourism. It's, this island still has very beautiful, unusual geological creations, let's say creations that looks very beautiful and very unusual. I think it could be very attractive. And of course, Soviet story. Unfortunately, military city was destroyed last year, 2020. Very pity for us, but actually we still have some piece of the story to talk about and something show to the people, like ships that still remains of ships that still exist in this region, and whole Soviet story. I think it could be very attractive, very interesting, especially for the people from 20th century who remember.
So I think, yeah, that's brilliant. I think Nida's put her hand up, but if you don't mind, Nida, Parker's got her hand up, like his hand up like this. So I think might jump the queue there. Go ahead, Parker.
I thought that was a really touching speech about Saiga. It made me love them even more than I already did.
Thank you so much. Nida.
Hi EJ, thanks for a really fascinating talk. When you said about the reforestation happening, did you that's all natural regeneration, isn't it? It hasn't been artificial. Would there be any plans to kind of try and speed up you know, regreening the area, or is that the plan would just be to protect it and lessen any you know, just to allow it to continue to regenerate naturally and see what happens?
It is actually partly due to artificial regeneration. So there's been a lot of, I think there's been a lot of dropping of seeds from helicopters onto this area.
Oh,
and so some of these species, I'm sure there are others in the call who know more, that some of these species are have been put in specifically to stabilize the seabed, to stop the kind of sand and pesticide blowing all over the place. But then obviously, when you saw my picture, there were some that were kind of from the reseeding, but then there was other vegetation that was coming in more naturally. So I think once you've got the reseeding, the baseline, then other stuff comes in.
Okay, and then will that help retain water levels to a certain extent, or make it a bit lusher and then increase the process? Or is there worry that there isn't enough water for, you know, will that have to be artificially watered, or that's not possible?
So these species are very dry adapted, so they're fine. When you go up towards Moonak, there's actually some artificial lakes there, which are absolutely hopping with birds. They're beautiful. There's just a lot of diversity there. But the idea is not ever to really try to get the sea back in this area. You know, it's just not possible. You might get some, but it's more about thinking forwards, about can we have a lush, beautiful system that is less stressed than it is now. And the northern part of the Aral Sea is very different, obviously.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rustam and Azamat have got their hands up as well.
Yeah. Azamat, would you like to go next?
Yeah, just yes. Once again, thank you. That was interesting even for me, even being local for me. I still found a lot of interesting information, and kind of the way that you presented it. It's wonderful. I liked it a lot. Thank you, and thank you for this event, Rose. Letting me join this talk. What we miss here, I just a few words about myself. I now represent a integrated cultural heritage framework in Kharizm region, and I work also for UNICEF. I help them to develop kind of a destination management plan for tourism development here in Karakol, Pakistan as a consultant, and also help local agencies like tour agencies, tour operators to develop tourism roads and kind of work as a guide. And I will work closely with some other international organizations. So I do have some kind of information about what's going on here in terms of nature protection and about like the tourism development and so on. So I think what we miss here is expertise, how to say, expert knowledge. So when some local authorities try to implement some projects that they think will, help to develop tourism here, or sustainable tourism, or let's say kind of work for nature protection, and sometimes they do the completely opposite things here. And when they try to create, let's say, some touristic sites, they usually think about, some construction, some changing infrastructure, creating some, fancy buildings and so on. Rather than, kind of adapting into nature and not changing the landscape, not changing the habitat of the animals living in the area. And this often happens in an opposite way when they try to do it. And like Moonak, you mentioned a wonderful place, but when they try to develop tourism there in Moonak, they actually changed the Moonak infrastructure a lot. So they created a lot of, this amphitheater, the stadium, the new fancy buildings, which all look the same in white plastic made of glass and steel and so on. And the place where there's a ship graveyard, so they created a kind of a cement around the ships. So if in previous years it looked very natural, and you could see the ships in the sands, and the saxaul and other bushes and other plants growing around. So you would walk around the ships and you would really feel them, the ships that they're abandoned and they're left in the sands, and you kind of feel that spirit. But now they're just cemented area with the ships like they in the museum, and it completely destroyed that feeling of the disaster, ecological disaster. And this often happens in other ways as well. So they're building a casino in Muina, can you believe it? And they think this is the right way to develop tourism. They believe that they can create, I don't know, some kind of Las Vegas over there. Some income generation and things like that. So what we miss here is, again, is the expert knowledge and expert opinion on how to develop tourism properly. Because, well, now Uzbekistan is trying to develop tourism, as I said, but that we are trying to do it in our own way. When we are lucky, actually, because we can use the expert knowledge of so many countries, we can use so many lessons learned and so many success stories, but we try to create our own things. And as I said, that not always they are very successful, I would say. So in a way, projects like this, like EBRD project in Kharezm, is very helpful because it really attracts a lot of experts from all over the world who come here and try to develop master plans, to develop the landscapes and so on, to create sustainable tourism opportunities here. Not all of the ideas are welcome here, because sometimes the government, people, authorities, they think that, well, okay, in order, like in Khiva, in Kharezm, the pearl of Kharezm, of Khiva, are the people who live in Khiva, because this is a living city. This is where people live, actually. But the strategy of the government now is kind of trying to move people, the habitats of Khiva, of Ichankala, out of this ancient city, and make a kind of place where there are only museums, hotels, cafes, and so on. Kind of the tourists have to spend money. This is the idea, but they don't know that this is kind of will slowly decrease the interest of tourists towards Khiva. So I would like, if this is possible, you run a lot of different projects all over the world. So kind of change, if it's possible, to somehow work more with the government, bring more expertise here, raising awareness about the proper development, sustainable tourism development in this region. So, and preserving natural, cultural heritage rather than destroying it, which we often face here as well. So things like that. I think projects like these are very much needed right now here on the stage of development, because I don't know if this will continue, we can face that we actually lose all the cultural heritage and all the historical heritage in a few decades if they continue destroying it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really speaks a lot to me, and that so sad to hear about the ship's graveyard, isn't it? Because it was such an amazing place. And I completely agree with you that the way to go is to have a niche market of high spending tourists who really understand the culture and the natural beauty, and not mass market tourism in the same places everywhere else in the world.
We'll take one more question from Rustam, I think, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. Rustam, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you for organizers for such a great event, and EJ for a wonderful presentation. Basically, there is nothing to ask EJ regarding presentation. It was quite clear. It was really nice to see some picture also from my project on the presentation. So it shows that we are working together. I just wanted to give a small comments to Nida's question about reforestation or succession of desiccated of Aral Sea bottom. As a landscape ecologist, so I also dealt with it, that in general, there is approach so to do afforestation there. So it's a big governmental program, and some international projects also they planted a lot of native species, desert species who are adapted to that environment, so they could get water mostly from rain, which is really scarce in this, with the quite low surviving rate, but that's only because of harsh environment. But that comes to more another question, because it's a forester approach and landscape ecology approach. So this forester is also in Europe pretty common, that we will bring dozens of tractors and plant some hectares, and that's it. So in this harsh environment, I think it doesn't really work, or it works, but with different peculiarities. I just wanted to say that there is a program and it's going something, but it's still under discussion which way should be better. So it's still also, we need some international support or some discourse about it, or researches.